The floor under my boots was already shaking before the doors opened, and I knew this was not going to be a normal day. My name is Leo Bennett, and I was standing in a line of alien recruits 3 heads taller than me, waiting to be judged by a machine that had never once been wrong. The room smelled like hot metal and static. Somewhere above us, a red light spun in slow circles, painting everyone's face the color of a warning. I had trained for this moment for 2 years. I had bled for it. I had missed birthdays, missed sleep, missed the chance to be a normal 17-year-old boy back on Earth, all so I could stand in this exact spot and prove that humans belonged among the stars. But standing here now, surrounded by creatures who could probably lift a transport truck over their heads, I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my life. A voice echoed through the chamber, flat and mechanical. "Ranking will now be announced. Please step forward when your name is called." One by one, the aliens stepped up to a raised platform. A tall being with blue-plated skin and 4 arms was called first. His name was Threx, and the machine measured his strength, his speed, his reflexes, all in less than a second. A number flashed above his head, bright gold, and the crowd of instructors murmured with approval. Next came a female alien with silver eyes and skin like polished stone. Her name was Naya. She barely reacted as the machine scanned her. Another gold number, another wave of quiet respect. I watched every recruit rise to the platform, get scanned, and take their place in a growing line that curved around the chamber like a queue for greatness. I was somewhere near the end of that line, and every step forward felt heavier than the last. Then a name was called that made the whole room go still for half a second. Bennett, Leo, species, human. A few of the aliens actually turned to look at me. Not out of respect, out of curiosity, the way you might glance at an insect that had wandered onto a busy street. I walked to the platform anyway, chin up, because my father once told me that fear only wins if you let it drive. The machine scanned me. Lights ran up and down my body in blue lines. For a moment, nothing happened, and I almost let myself hope. Then the number appeared above my head. It was small, dim, almost apologetic in how quietly it glowed. Not gold, not even silver, a dull gray number that told the entire chamber exactly what they already believed. Last place. Laughter broke out from a group near the back, sharp and unashamed. I did not need to turn around to know who was laughing loudest. I already knew his name because everyone in this academy knew his name. Torak Vane. He was the strongest recruit in 3 star systems, a Drenok with skin like dark iron and arms as thick as tree trunks. He had never lost a single trial. He had never even been challenged in one. When he laughed, it was not cruel exactly. It was worse than that. It was certain. Like he had already decided humans were a joke before I ever opened my mouth. "They let insects into the academy now," Torak said, loud enough for the whole chamber to hear. "Maybe the mascots get their own line next time." A few of the other recruits chuckled. Naya did not laugh, but she did not defend me either. She just watched, arms folded, the way you watch a storm you are certain will pass without touching you. I stepped down from the platform and walked to the end of the line, past every single alien who now stood taller than me in more ways than one. My gray number floated silently above my head the whole way, like a shadow that refused to leave. An instructor named Commander Ilira Voss walked the line a few minutes later, reading names off a datapad. She was not human, but she was not unkind either. A species I did not recognize with pale green skin and calm yellow eyes that missed nothing. "You will be grouped according to your ranking," she said, her voice carrying easily across the chamber. "Highest to lowest determines training squad, mission priority, and combat assignment. This is not a punishment. This is simply how the numbers work." I raised my hand before I could stop myself. What if the numbers are wrong? The chamber went quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. Commander Voss turned to look at me, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker behind her yellow eyes. Curiosity, maybe. Or warning. "The scanner does not make mistakes, recruit," she said. "It measures exactly what it is built to measure." "Then maybe it isn't measuring the right thing," I said. Torak laughed again, louder this time, and a few others joined him. Commander Voss did not laugh. She studied me for a long moment, long enough that the laughter around us slowly died down on its own. "We will see," she said quietly, and moved on to the next name. That night, I lay on a narrow bunk in a dormitory built for bodies twice my size, staring at a ceiling that hummed faintly with the sound of engines somewhere deep in the station. My roommate was a lanky alien named Fen, part of a species that barely spoke unless spoken to first, so the silence in the room felt heavier than it should have. I thought about home. I thought about my mother standing at the launch platform, refusing to cry even though her eyes were shining. I thought about my little sister, who told me before I left that she wanted to be an astronaut too, and that she was proud her big brother would be the first human recruit in the Academy's history. I did not tell her I might also be the last, if I failed. I thought about the gray number above my head and how it followed me even in the dark, glowing behind my eyes every time I blinked. Last place. Not almost last, not near the bottom. Last, out of every single recruit in a class built from the strongest species in known space. I could have let that number define me. Part of me wanted to, because giving up would have been so much easier than trying. But another part of me, the part that had spent 2 years training in gravity chambers built for creatures 3 times my weight, refused to accept a single number as the final word on who I was. Somewhere down the hall, I heard voices. I recognized one of them immediately. "He actually questioned the scanner," Torak was saying, his deep voice rumbling through the thin dormitory walls. A human, talking back to Commander Voss like his opinion matters. Another voice laughed, one I did not recognize. "He will not last a week," it said. "None of them ever do." I lay very still, listening, feeling something tighten in my chest that was not quite anger and not quite fear. It was something sharper than both. It was the feeling of being written off before I had even had the chance to try. I closed my eyes and made myself a quiet promise in the dark, one I did not say out loud, one nobody else would ever hear unless I proved it true with my own 2 hands. They could rank me last all they wanted, but rankings were just numbers, and numbers could change. The next morning, training began before the sun, or whatever this station used in place of 1, had fully risen. A wide bell rang through the corridors, sharp and sudden, and within minutes every recruit stood assembled in the main yard, a massive open space with a metal floor and walls lined with viewing platforms for instructors to watch from above. Commander Voss stood at the front, her hands folded behind her back. "Today begins endurance testing," she announced. "You will run the full length of the outer track, complete the obstacle course at the halfway point, and finish with a weighted carry to the far marker. Anyone who fails to complete the course within the time limit will be marked for review." Review meant removal. Everyone knew that, even without her saying it directly. I glanced down the line at the other recruits. Threx cracked his 4 knuckles like it was nothing. Naya stretched with the same calm expression she always wore. Torak did not even bother stretching. He simply stood there, arms crossed, radiating the kind of confidence that came from never once being tested past his limits. I stretched slowly, quietly, the way I had trained myself to do back on Earth, back before any of this was real. My legs were shorter than every alien around me. My arms were weaker. My lungs, according to every scan the Academy had run, processed oxygen less efficiently than nearly every species present. But there was one thing the scanner never measured, one thing that never showed up as a glowing number above anyone's head. How long a person was willing to keep going after their body told them to stop. The starting horn sounded, and the yard exploded into motion. The track stretched out ahead of us like a gray ribbon wrapped around the entire station, disappearing into a haze of steam vents and rotating machinery. Recruits surged forward in a wave of muscle and momentum, and within the first 10 seconds, I was already near the back of the pack. Threx moved like a machine, his forearms pumping in perfect rhythm, eating up ground with strides twice the length of mine. Naya ran with an eerie stillness, her upper body barely moving even as her legs carried her forward at a blistering pace. And Torak, somehow, was already pulling ahead of everyone, his heavy frame moving with a speed that should not have been possible for something built like a walking mountain. I settled into my own rhythm instead of trying to match theirs. My coach back on Earth used to say that racing someone else's pace was the fastest way to lose. So I ran my own race, steady breaths, steady steps, eyes fixed on the obstacle course rising in the distance. By the time I reached the first obstacle, a wall twice my height with no handholds, most of the group had already cleared it and moved on. I studied it for half a second, then backed up, sprinted, and used the momentum of my run to plant one foot against the wall and launch myself up to catch the top edge. My arms screamed in protest as I hauled myself over, but I made it, dropping down on the other side just as another recruit landed beside me. It was Naya. She glanced at me with something unreadable in her silver eyes. "You are slower than expected," she said, not unkindly, more like she was simply stating a fact. "I'm still here," I said, already moving toward the next obstacle. She fell into step beside me for a moment, matching my pace instead of pulling ahead, which surprised me more than anything else that had happened so far. "Torak says humans break easily," she said. "He has never actually tested that theory. He simply assumes it." "And what do you think?" I asked, ducking under a swinging bar and rolling to my feet on the other side. Naya considered the question for a moment, vaulting over a low barrier without breaking stride. "I think assumptions are dangerous," she said, "but I also think you should save your breath for running." She pulled ahead after that, leaving me to finish the obstacle course alone. I did not mind. Her words stayed with me longer than her company would have, turning over in my mind as I pushed through a tunnel filled with knee-deep water, then scrambled up a slope of loose gravel that shifted under every step. By the time I reached the weighted carry section, my legs were shaking and my lungs burned with every breath. A row of metal crates sat waiting, each one marked with a weight rating far heavier than anything I had trained with back home. I was supposed to carry one the rest of the way to the far marker, nearly half a mile across uneven terrain. I looked at the crate assigned to my size and felt my stomach drop. It was heavier than I was. Around me, other recruits hoisted their crates with relative ease, their stronger bodies built for exactly this kind of raw physical burden. I crouched down, wrapped my arms around the crate, and heaved with everything I had. It did not move. I tried again, planting my feet wider, using my legs instead of my back the way I had been taught. This time the crate lifted, just barely, and I staggered forward under its weight, every muscle in my body screaming for me to set it down and rest. I did not set it down. Step by step, I carried that crate across the uneven ground, past recruits who had already finished and were watching from the sidelines, past instructors taking notes on data pads, past a burning sensation in my arms that made me wonder if something inside me might actually tear. I thought about the gray number above my head. I thought about the laughter in the dormitory hallway the night before. I thought about my sister telling everyone her big brother was going to be the first human in the academy, and how disappointed she would be if I quit now, less than 1 week in. So I kept walking. By the time I reached the far marker and dropped the crate onto the ground, my legs finally gave out beneath me, and I sat down hard in the dirt, chest heaving, sweat stinging my eyes. I had finished dead last among everyone still on the course. But I had finished. A shadow fell over me, and I looked up to see Torak standing there, already finished long ago, his own crate resting easily against his shoulder like it weighed nothing at all. "You should have quit," he said, not with anger, but with something almost like confusion, as if my continued presence genuinely puzzled him. "The weight was clearly beyond you, yet you finished anyway. Why?" I wiped sweat from my forehead and looked up at him. "Because quitting was an option," I said, "and I decided not to take it." Torak studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes narrowing slightly, and then he simply turned and walked away without another word. I did not know what to make of that. It was not respect. It was not quite dismissal either. It was something in between, like he had filed me away as a strange curiosity he did not yet understand. Commander Voss approached a few minutes later, her datapad glowing faintly in the morning light. "Your time was the slowest of the group," she said, reading from the screen. "By a significant margin." "I know," I said, "and yet you completed every section of the course, including the weighted carry, which 3 other recruits failed to finish entirely." I looked up at her, surprised. I had not realized anyone had failed. I had been too focused on my own struggle to notice. "The scanner measures raw output," Commander Voss continued, almost to herself. "Speed, strength, reaction time. It does not measure whether a recruit finishes what they start." "Maybe it should," I said quietly. She did not respond to that, but she made a note on her datapad before walking away, and I could not tell if it was a note in my favor or against me. Either way, I had survived the first real test, even if I had crawled across the finish line instead of striding across it like everyone else. Over the following days, the pattern repeated itself again and again. Every trial the Academy threw at us, I finished near the very back of the pack, sometimes barely making the time limit, sometimes missing it entirely and facing a stern warning from an instructor. But I never failed to finish. Not once. There was a trial involving extreme heat, where recruits had to cross a chamber lined with vents that blasted scalding air in random intervals. 3 recruits from stronger species collapsed partway through, their bodies simply unable to handle the sustained temperature despite their raw strength. I made it across, moving slower than anyone, timing my steps carefully between blasts, sweat soaking through my uniform by the time I reached the other side. There was a trial involving low oxygen, where the air in the training chamber was slowly thinned over the course of an hour while recruits performed basic tasks. My scans had always shown weaker lung efficiency than nearly every other species in the Academy, and I expected to fail immediately. Instead, I found a strange kind of calm settling over me as the air grew thinner, a stubborn refusal to panic that let me conserve energy while recruits around me gasped and struggled. Naya finished that trial only a few seconds ahead of me, and afterward she looked at me with genuine curiosity for the first time. "Your species should have failed that test," she said. "Your biology is not suited for it." "Maybe biology isn't the only thing that matters," I said, still catching my breath. She tilted her head slightly, considering that. "Torak believes strength is the only thing that matters," she said. "He has built his entire reputation on that belief. It would be interesting to see what happens if that belief is ever proven wrong." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing at all, but her words settled into me like a seed, quiet and patient, waiting for the right moment to grow into something bigger. The Academy held a mid-cycle assembly 2 weeks into training, where instructors reviewed the progress of every recruit in front of the entire class. I stood near the back of the room, still ranked last on every official chart, still wearing that same dull gray number above my file whenever it appeared on the main screen. But something had shifted, even if the numbers had not. Recruits who once laughed openly at my presence now watched me with a quieter kind of attention. Some still mocked me under their breath, Torak loudest among them, but fewer voices joined in than before. Finn, my quiet roommate, had started nodding to me in the mornings, a small gesture that meant more than it should have. Commander Voss stood at the front of the assembly, addressing the room with her usual calm authority. "The Academy has trained recruits from over 40 species across known space," she said. "Every one of them arrives believing their strength defines their worth. Most of them are wrong." A murmur ran through the crowd. Torak, standing near the front with his arms crossed, did not look pleased. "Strength matters," Commander Voss continued, "but strength without endurance is a fire that burns bright and dies fast. This academy does not exist to crown the strongest recruit. It exists to forge the ones who last." Her eyes moved across the room, and for just a moment, landed on me. "Remember that," she said, "before you decide who does and does not belong here." The assembly ended shortly after, and recruits filed out in scattered groups, whispering among themselves. I stayed behind for a moment, staring at the main screen where the rankings still glowed in their familiar order: gold at the top, silver in the middle, and my own dull gray number sitting quietly at the very bottom. Last place, still last place. But for the first time since I had arrived, the number did not feel like a wall closing in around me. It felt like a floor I was standing on, solid and unmoving, waiting for the moment I would finally push back against everyone who thought it was the only thing that defined me. Behind me, I heard heavy footsteps approaching, and I did not need to turn around to know who they belonged to. "You are still last," Torak said, his voice low. "Every trial, every single time." "I know," I said, finally turning to face him. "And yet you keep coming back," he said, studying me with that same puzzled expression from before, like I was a piece of a puzzle that refused to fit any shape he understood. "Why does that not bother you?" I thought about the question for a moment before answering, choosing my words carefully. "Being last doesn't scare me," I said. "Quitting does." Torak said nothing for a long moment, his dark eyes searching my face for something I could not name. Then he turned and walked away without another word, leaving me alone in front of the glowing rankings, my gray number burning quietly at the bottom of the list like a small, stubborn flame that refused to go out. I did not know it yet, but that flame was about to be tested in a way none of us had expected. 3 days later, an announcement echoed through every corridor of the academy at once, pulling recruits out of their bunks, their meals, their training sessions, all at the same moment. "All recruits report to the central arena immediately. The immovable trial will now commence." I had heard whispers about the immovable trial before, mostly from older recruits who spoke about it in hushed, almost reverent tones. It was not a required part of standard training. It was older than that, a tradition carried over from a dozen different species, a ritual meant to settle questions of strength in the most direct way possible. 2 recruits would stand inside a marked circle. One would attempt to force the other out, using nothing but their own body. No weapons, no tools, no tricks beyond raw physical force and technique. The recruit who left the circle, whether by being pushed, thrown, or simply unable to hold their ground, lost. The recruit who remained standing inside the circle when the trial ended was declared the winner. It was simple. It was brutal in its simplicity, and it settled arguments about strength in a way that no scanner or number ever could. I made my way to the central arena along with everyone else, weaving through a crowd of aliens twice my size, all of them buzzing with the same nervous excitement. The arena itself was a massive circular chamber, with tiered seating rising up on all sides, already filling with instructors and recruits, eager to watch whatever was about to happen. A wide, glowing circle sat at the center of the arena floor, its edges marked with pale blue light that pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat. Commander Voss stood near the circle, flanked by 2 other instructors I did not recognize. When the last of the recruits had gathered, she raised a hand, and the murmuring crowd fell silent almost instantly. "The immovable trial has not been called in this academy for over 3 years, she announced, her voice carrying easily across the tiered seating. "It has been requested today by one of our recruits, and academy tradition grants the right to accept or decline such a challenge." My stomach twisted into a knot even before she said the next words, because some part of me already knew what was coming. "Torak Vane has challenged Leo Bennett." The chamber erupted into noise, some of it laughter, some of it genuine surprise, all of it washing over me like a wave I had not been prepared for. I searched the crowd until I found Torak standing near the front, his dark eyes fixed directly on me, his expression calm in a way that felt far more dangerous than open hostility ever could. Commander Voss turned to me, her yellow eyes steady and unreadable. "You may decline this challenge without penalty," she said. "The trial is voluntary. No recruit is required to accept." Every instinct in my body told me to decline. Torak outweighed me by what had to be well over 100 pounds of solid muscle. He had never lost a single physical contest in his entire time at the academy. Accepting this challenge felt less like a fair trial and more like walking directly into a wall built specifically to crush me. But I thought about the gray number that had followed me for weeks. I thought about the laughter in the dormitory hallway on my very first night. I thought about every instructor and recruit who had already decided, before I ever said a single word, that I did not belong here. If I declined now, that decision would follow me for the rest of my time at this academy, whether I ever spoke about it again or not. Everyone would remember the day the human boy backed down. "I accept," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. A fresh wave of noise rolled through the arena, louder this time, and somewhere in the crowd I heard someone already taking bets, alien voices calling out odds that were not remotely in my favor. Naya stood near the front row, her expression unreadable, but her silver eyes never left me as I made my way toward the glowing circle. Finn caught my arm briefly as I passed, his usually quiet voice barely above a whisper. "You do not have to prove anything," he said. "I know," I said, "but I want to." I stepped into the circle, and the pale blue light seemed to pulse a little brighter beneath my boots, as if acknowledging my presence. A moment later, Torak stepped in from the opposite side, and the sheer size difference between us felt even more overwhelming up close than it had from across the room. He stood nearly 2 feet taller than me, his shoulders broad enough to block out the arena lights behind him, his arms thick with muscle built for exactly this kind of contest. I felt impossibly small standing across from him, but I forced myself to plant my feet and hold my ground anyway. Commander Voss raised her hand once more, addressing both of us directly. "The rules are simple," she said. "No strikes intended to cause lasting harm. No weapons. No assistance from outside the circle. The trial ends when one recruit leaves the circle, by any means, or when I call the trial complete. Do you both understand?" "Yes," Torak said, his voice calm and certain. "Yes," I said, my own voice tight but steady. "Then begin," Commander Voss said, stepping back from the circle. For a moment, neither of us moved. Torak studied me with the same puzzled expression he always wore when he looked at me, like he was trying to solve a problem that refused to make sense. I planted my feet wider, lowered my center of gravity, the way my coach back on Earth had drilled into me 100 times over, and waited. Then Torak moved. He came at me fast for someone his size, his massive arms reaching to grab hold of my shoulders and simply drive me backward out of the circle with brute force. I did not try to match his strength, because I knew, without any doubt, that I would lose that contest instantly. Instead, I dropped my weight lower and angled my body sideways at the last possible moment, letting his momentum carry past me instead of through me. He stumbled slightly, more from surprise than any real loss of balance, and spun back to face me with a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not anger, attention. The crowd around us had gone quiet, watching closely now instead of laughing. Torak came at me again, this time slower, more controlled, clearly adjusting his approach. He grabbed my arm and tried to twist me off balance, using leverage instead of raw force. I felt my feet slide slightly against the arena floor, and for a terrifying half-second, I thought I was about to be thrown clean out of the circle. I planted my back foot hard, bent my knees, and used every ounce of core strength I had built during 2 years of relentless training, twisting my body just enough to break his grip and regain my footing. It was not graceful. It was not the kind of move that would win applause in a normal fighting contest. But it worked, and I remained standing inside the circle. Torak took a step back, breathing slightly harder than before, studying me with open curiosity now instead of dismissal. "You have trained for this," he said. Not quite a question. "I've trained for everything," I said. "Every single day since I got here." He nodded slowly, almost to himself, and then came at me a third time, this attempt more aggressive than the last two combined. He wrapped both arms around my torso, lifting me slightly off the ground, in an attempt to simply carry me out of the circle by force, and for a moment my feet left the floor entirely, my stomach dropping with a rush of pure panic. I twisted hard, driving my elbow down against his forearm in a pressure point my instructors had shown me months ago, and the sudden sharp discomfort was enough to make his grip loosen just slightly. It was not enough to break free entirely, but it was enough to shift my weight, and I managed to hook one leg behind his ankle as he tried to reposition his stance. He stumbled, and for the first time since the trial began, Torak Vane nearly lost his own footing. The crowd gasped audibly, a sound that rippled through the entire arena at once. Torak caught himself before falling, but he had to plant one hand against the arena floor to do it, and when he straightened back up, his expression had changed completely. The calm confidence was gone, replaced by something sharper, more focused. "You are stronger than you appear," he said, circling me slowly now instead of charging forward. "I never said I was weak," I said, circling with him, keeping my stance low and balanced. "I said I was underestimated." He came at me again, and this time our exchange lasted longer than any before it. A grinding, exhausting struggle of grips and counter-grips, shifts in weight, small adjustments in footing that meant the difference between staying inside the circle and being thrown clear out of it. I felt every muscle in my body straining against his far greater raw strength, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not win this contest through force alone. So I did not try to. Instead, I focused entirely on balance, on leverage, on making my smaller size work in my favor instead of against me. Every time Torak tried to overpower me directly, I redirected his momentum instead of meeting it head-on. Every time he tried to lift me off the ground, I twisted my body just enough to make it harder for him to maintain his grip. Minutes passed. My arms burned. My legs shook with the effort of holding my ground against someone built to overpower nearly anything that stood in his way. But I remained inside the circle, and slowly, gradually, I began to notice something shift in Torak's own movements. He was tiring. It should not have been possible. He was stronger than me in every measurable way, built for exactly this kind of sustained physical contest. But raw strength, I realized, burned through energy fast, and Torak had spent the last several minutes throwing everything he had at me in short, explosive bursts, each attempt more forceful than the last, each attempt failing to remove me from the circle. I, on the other hand, had spent those same minutes conserving energy wherever I could, letting his own strength work against him instead of matching it directly. It was a strategy born from necessity, but it was working, and I could see the exhaustion beginning to show in the way his breathing grew heavier, in the slight tremor that had crept into his massive arms. Commander Voss watched from the edge of the circle, her expression unreadable, but her eyes never left either of us for a single moment. Torak came at me one final time, gathering himself for what I could tell was meant to be a decisive effort, every remaining ounce of strength focused into a single powerful charge meant to end the contest once and for all. I planted my feet, lowered my center of gravity as far as I could without losing my footing entirely, and braced myself for the impact I knew was coming. Torak's final charge hit me like a wall of solid muscle, his arms wrapping around my shoulders as he drove forward with every remaining ounce of strength he had left. My boots skidded backward across the arena floor, my whole body screaming under the pressure of his full weight bearing down on me, and for one terrifying instant I felt the edge of the circle brush against my heel. I refused to let it go any further. I dropped my weight straight down, bending my knees until I was almost crouching, and drove both hands against his chest, not to push him back, because I knew I could never match his strength, but to redirect the angle of his charge just enough to throw off his balance. At the same moment, I hooked my foot behind his ankle again, harder this time, using the last of my own strength to hold my ground instead of trying to win through force. Torak's momentum, no longer aimed cleanly through me, twisted sideways instead. His massive frame lurched, arms flailing briefly as he fought to regain his footing, and for one full second, the strongest recruit in the entire academy nearly fell. He did not fall, but he also did not move me. We stood locked together at the center of the circle, both of us straining, both of us breathing hard, neither one giving an inch. The crowd around the arena had gone completely silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on the two of us frozen in that impossible standoff. Torak pushed again, harder, his teeth clenched with effort, every muscle in his massive frame straining against me. I felt my boots dig into the arena floor, felt every tendon in my legs pulled tight as a wire, felt my whole body shaking with the effort of simply refusing to move. I did not move. He tried again, shifting his grip, trying a different angle, trying to lift instead of push, trying anything he could think of to force me even a single inch closer to the edge of the circle. And every single time, I found a way to redirect his effort, to plant my feet a little deeper, to lower my center of gravity a little further, to hold on through sheer stubborn will when my body had long since run out of raw strength to offer. Sweat poured down both of our faces. My arms had gone numb from the strain. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, drowning out even the silence of the crowd around us. But somewhere in the middle of that exhausting, grinding struggle, I stopped thinking about winning entirely. I only thought about not moving. Torak let out a frustrated sound, something between a growl and a gasp, and threw everything he had left into one final, desperate effort, wrapping both arms fully around my torso and lifting with every remaining ounce of strength in his massive body. My feet left the ground. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought it was over, that I was about to be carried straight out of the circle and lose in front of the entire academy. But even suspended off the ground, I twisted hard, hooking both legs around his own for leverage, throwing my weight sideways instead of fighting the lift directly. Torak stumbled under the sudden shift in balance, his footing finally giving way beneath him, and both of us crashed down together onto the arena floor in a tangled heap. For a moment, neither of us moved, both of us too exhausted to immediately understand what had just happened. Then I heard Commander Voss's voice cut through the silence. Trial complete. I pushed myself up onto shaking arms, chest heaving, every muscle in my body screaming in protest, and looked down to see exactly where I had landed. My knees were planted firmly inside the glowing blue circle. Torak lay sprawled beside me, one arm draped over the very edge of the boundary, his shoulder resting just outside the pale light. He was outside the circle. I was still inside it. The chamber exploded into noise, a deafening roar of confusion, disbelief, and something that almost sounded like awe, hundreds of voices all speaking at once. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the position of Torak's arm, unable to fully process what had just happened. Torak pushed himself up slowly, staring down at his own shoulder resting outside the circle, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. The strongest recruit in the entire academy, a being who had never lost a single physical contest in his life, sat frozen in place, his expression a mixture of confusion and something that looked almost like disbelief, directed entirely at himself. Commander Voss stepped forward, raising a hand to quiet the roaring crowd, though it took several long moments before the noise finally settled into something resembling silence. "The trial is decided," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned arena. "Leo Bennett remains within the circle. Torak Vane does not." The silence that followed was heavier than any noise could have been. I looked around at the sea of faces staring down at me from the tiered seating, aliens of a dozen different species, all of them watching me with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to something I had not seen directed at me since arriving at this academy. Respect. Torak finally rose to his feet, offering a hand down to help me up, which I accepted without hesitation. His grip was still impossibly strong, but there was no cruelty in it now, no dismissal, nothing left of the alien who had laughed at me on my very first day. "I could not move you," he said quietly, his voice pitched just for me, though I suspected half the arena could still hear it in the lingering silence. "I used everything I had, and you did not move. I couldn't match your strength," I said honestly, still catching my breath. "So I didn't try to." Torak studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind his dark eyes, a recalculation happening in real time as he processed exactly what had just occurred. "Then what did you use instead?" he asked. I thought about the question carefully before answering, because it deserved an honest answer, not a clever one. "I used everything else," I said. "Balance, timing, and the fact that I decided, a long time ago, that I was not going to be moved." The arena remained quiet around us, hundreds of eyes still watching, still processing exactly what they had just witnessed. Somewhere in the crowd, I heard Naya's voice, calm and clear, cutting through the lingering silence. "The strongest recruit in the academy could not move the recruit ranked last," she said, to no one in particular, though her words carried easily across the hushed arena. "Perhaps our rankings have been measuring the wrong thing all along." Nobody laughed at that. Nobody disagreed either. I stood there in the center of that glowing circle, exhausted beyond anything I had ever felt in my life, my whole body trembling with the aftermath of everything it had just endured, and for the first time since stepping foot on this academy station, I did not feel small at all. News of the trial spread through the academy faster than any official announcement ever could. By the time I made it back to my dormitory that evening, exhausted and aching in places I did not know could ache, recruits I had never even spoken to were nodding to me in the hallways, some of them offering small gestures of respect from their own cultures that I did not fully understand but recognized as sincere all the same. Finn was waiting outside our room when I arrived, leaning against the wall with an expression that, for once, was not entirely unreadable. "You held the circle," he said simply. "Barely," I said, my legs still trembling slightly with every step. "Barely is still holding," Finn replied, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something that might have been the beginning of a smile cross his face. I collapsed onto my bunk that night without even bothering to remove my boots, and sleep found me almost instantly, deep and dreamless, the kind of rest that only comes after a body has been pushed completely past its limits and somehow survived the experience intact. The following morning, an announcement called all recruits back to the Central Assembly Hall, and I made my way there with a strange mixture of exhaustion and quiet anticipation settling in my chest. The main screen at the front of the hall displayed the same ranking chart it always had, gold names at the top, silver in the middle, and my own name sitting exactly where it had sat since my very first day. Last place. But something about it felt different this time, and I was not entirely certain why until Commander Voss stepped forward to address the assembled recruits. "Yesterday's trial has prompted a review of our current evaluation system," she announced, her voice carrying its usual calm authority across the silent hall. "The Academy scanner measures physical output with perfect accuracy, strength, speed, reaction time, endurance thresholds. What it has never measured, and what it was never designed to measure, is a recruit's capacity to endure beyond the limits their own biology suggests they should have." A murmur ran through the crowd, but nobody interrupted her. "Leo Bennett's ranking will remain unchanged on the current chart," she continued, and for a moment my stomach dropped, bracing for disappointment I had not expected to feel this strongly. Because the current chart measures only raw physical statistics, and those statistics have not changed. She paused, letting her words settle over the room. "However, the Academy will be introducing a secondary evaluation, effective immediately, measuring endurance, resilience, and completion rate across all trials. This metric will carry equal weight in future mission assignments and combat rankings." The murmur grew louder, though this time it carried a different tone entirely, something closer to genuine interest than surprise. "Under this new metric," Commander Voss continued, "Leo Bennett currently holds the highest completion rate of any recruit in this Academy's current class. He has finished every single trial assigned to him, without exception, regardless of his ranking on the physical scanner." I stood frozen in place, barely able to process what I was hearing. Around me, recruits turned to look at me again, but the expressions on their faces had changed completely from that very first day. No laughter, no dismissal, just quiet, genuine attention. Torak stood near the front of the assembly, and when he turned to look back at me, he offered a small nod, deliberate and clear, the kind of gesture that meant something between beings who understood exactly what it represented. After the assembly ended, I found myself standing outside the hall, still trying to process everything that had happened over the past few days, when Commander Voss approached me directly, something she had never done before. "You asked me a question on your very first day," she said. "You asked what happens if the numbers are wrong." "I remember," I said. "The numbers were not wrong," she said. "They measured exactly what they were built to measure, but they were incomplete. There is a difference." I considered her words carefully, watching the last of the recruits disperse from the assembly hall around us. "Humans are not the strongest species to walk through these doors," Commander Voss continued. "You are not the fastest, and you are certainly not the most naturally gifted, if raw biology is the only measure being used. But raw biology has never been the only thing that determines whether a soldier, a scientist, or an explorer succeeds beyond this academy's walls." "Then what does?" I asked. She studied me for a long moment before answering, her yellow eyes calm and thoughtful. "The willingness to keep standing after every reasonable measure says you should have already fallen," she said. "That is not something my scanner can quantify, but I suspect, given time, humanity may teach the rest of this academy exactly how valuable that quality truly is." She walked away after that, leaving me alone with those words settling deep into my chest, heavier and more meaningful than any single number ever could have been. Over the following weeks, something shifted across the entire academy, slow and steady, like a current changing direction beneath the surface of still water. Other human recruits began arriving in small numbers, drawn by reports that had somehow made their way back to Earth about a boy who refused to be moved. I was no longer the only human walking these halls, and each new arrival looked to me with a kind of quiet expectation I had never asked for, but slowly learned to accept. Naya and I became close during that time, training together whenever our schedules allowed, and she often reminded me of that very first conversation we had during the obstacle course, when she told me that assumptions were dangerous. "Torak assumed you would break," she said one evening, as we sat together near the edge of the training yard, watching the artificial sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Everyone assumed you would break. I am beginning to think assumptions about your species may need to be reconsidered entirely." "What about your own assumptions?" I asked. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "I assumed strength was singular," she said. "One kind of strength, measured one way. I no longer believe that." Torak, surprisingly, became something close to a friend over those following weeks, though our relationship remained built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than easy familiarity. He requested a rematch exactly once, a few weeks after our first trial, and I accepted without hesitation, curious to see whether the outcome would be any different now that he understood exactly what he was facing. It lasted even longer than our first contest, both of us better prepared, both of us pushing the other harder than before. In the end, neither of us left the circle before Commander Voss called the trial complete due to time, and we stood there together afterward, both exhausted, both satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with winning or losing. "You are still the only recruit I have never been able to move," Torak said, catching his breath. "And you're still the only recruit who's ever come close to moving me," I said. He laughed at that, a genuine sound, nothing like the mocking laughter from my very first day in this academy. "Perhaps that is enough," he said. "Perhaps it does not need to be more than that." I thought about my sister often during those months, imagining her reaction when the first reports finally reached Earth about what had happened in that arena, about a small, unremarkable ranking that had somehow proven itself far more meaningful than any number on a glowing chart. I imagined her telling everyone at school that her big brother was not just the first human recruit in the academy's history, but the recruit the strongest being in the entire class could not move. I graduated from that first training cycle many months later, standing alongside Naya, Torak, Fen, and a growing number of human recruits who had followed in my footsteps, drawn by a story that had spread far beyond anything I ever intended to create. My final ranking on the physical scanner remained low, unremarkable compared to towering aliens built for raw strength in ways my own body would never match. But my name sat near the very top of an entirely different chart now, one measuring something the Academy had never properly valued before I arrived: completion rate, endurance under pressure. The simple, stubborn refusal to be moved once a decision had been made. Commander Voss addressed the graduating class on our final day, her voice carrying the same calm authority it always had, though her words that day felt different somehow, more permanent, like something meant to be remembered long after we had all scattered across the galaxy to whatever missions awaited us. "This academy has trained recruits from countless species across known space," she said. "We have measured strength in every form our instruments could quantify. But this cycle taught us something our instruments could not measure alone." Her eyes found mine across the assembled crowd, and she held my gaze for a long, deliberate moment. "Sometimes the greatest strength is not found in what a body can lift, or how fast it can move, or how much force it can generate in a single moment," she said. "Sometimes the greatest strength is simply refusing to leave the circle, no matter how much force is thrown against you." I stood there among my fellow graduates, human and alien alike, and thought back to that very first day, standing in a line of towering recruits, while a dull gray number glowed silently above my head, marking me as the very last among them. That number had never told the whole story. It never could have, because rankings were just numbers, built to measure what could be easily measured. But the things that truly mattered, the things that decided who a person became when everything else was stripped away, those things had never fit neatly onto any glowing chart. I left that academy as the boy who had once been placed last, but I carried with me something far more valuable than any high ranking could have offered. I carried the knowledge that being underestimated was never a weakness, as long as you understood the truth for yourself long before anyone else was willing to see it. Somewhere out among the stars, new recruits were arriving at academies just like this one, human and alien alike, each of them about to be measured, sorted, and ranked by scanners that could quantify strength but never quite capture spirit. Some of them would be placed at the very bottom of their own charts, just as I once was. I hoped, wherever they were, that they would remember what I had learned inside that glowing circle, that being placed last was never the same as being finished, and that sometimes the strongest force in the entire galaxy was nothing more than a quiet, unshakable decision to hold your ground, no matter what stood against you. The circle does not care how tall you are, or how much weight you can lift, or what number glows above your head on the day you arrive. The circle only cares whether you are still standing inside it when everything else has been thrown against you. I was still standing, and I intended to remain that way, for every circle life would ever place me inside, for as long as I possibly could.